November 6, 2000. A Kansas state trooper pulls over a Ryder truck on a dark rural highway. Routine traffic stop. But when agents crack open the cargo door, they freeze. Inside, 41 kilograms of LSD, enough to dose 500 million people. Within months, acid availability across America crashes by 95%. Not because they busted a cartel, not because they dismantled a network. They'd captured the source, a single man. And here's what made the DEA's jaws drop. The chemist wasn't some basement tweaker. He was a Harvard-trained researcher who studied drug threats for the government by day. His laboratory? A 15-story nuclear missile silo in Kansas, built to survive World War III, now converted into the largest acid factory on Earth. For over a year, he'd been quietly supplying 90% of the world's LSD, and no one knew he existed. How did a Harvard researcher become the acid king? And how did he really got busted? William Leonard Pickard earned a Princeton scholarship at 17 years old. By his 40s, he was conducting drug policy research at Harvard and UCLA, publishing peer-reviewed papers on synthetic opioids and emerging psychedelics, consulting with government agencies on controlled substance trends. His colleagues knew him as meticulous, obsessive, brilliant, a man who could discourse on organic chemistry and Byzantine theology with equal fluency. None of them suspected he viewed LSD as humanity's last hope. In his own writings, Pickard compared acid to communion, more holy than a wafer, a chemical sacrament capable of expanding consciousness on a planetary scale. He wasn't manufacturing for profit. He believed synthesizing pure LSD was an act of service, a gift to humanity that governments had criminalized out of fear and ignorance. But manufacturing LSD at world-changing volume required solving a problem that had defeated every clandestine chemist before him. The key precursor, ergotamine tartrate, ranks among the most tightly controlled substances on Earth. Derived from ergot fungus, it serves as the molecular backbone of LSD synthesis. The compound cannot be manufactured in a garage or basement. It requires industrial fermentation equipment and specialized extraction processes. Pharmaceutical companies that produce migraine medication account for every milligram. Intelligence agencies in multiple countries flag bulk purchases automatically. 25 kilograms of ergotamine can yield roughly 5 kilograms of pure LSD crystalline, enough for 100 million individual doses at standard strength. Pickard wasn't interested in manufacturing thousands of hits for local distribution. He envisioned hundreds of millions of doses flowing across continents. Without a serious source of precursor, even world-class chemistry expertise meant nothing. Pickard's solution was social engineering executed at corporate scale. He established a shell company in Europe, complete with letterhead, business registration documents, and a convincing pharmaceutical cover story. Through this front, he placed orders with chemical suppliers as a legitimate migraine medication manufacturer. The ergotamine shipped across international borders in plain sight, labeled as routine industrial supply, cleared through customs without a second glance. By exploiting regulatory gaps between European and American jurisdictions, Pickard accomplished what the DEA considered functionally impossible. He legally acquired multiple drums of the one ingredient that could transform his knowledge into world-altering power. By late 1998, Pickard possessed what no illicit chemist had ever accumulated. Green steel canisters filled with ergocristine, a close chemical cousin of ergotamine equally suitable for synthesis, sat in storage facilities he controlled, enough raw material to sustain years of continuous production. Federal agents would later seize nearly 20 kilograms of this precursor stockpile, a quantity capable of synthesizing 12 kilograms of pure crystalline LSD. Translated into street distribution, 3 billion individual doses. The DEA's own analysts valued the potential output exceeding $1 billion wholesale. Pickard had solved the supply chain problem that strangled every previous large-scale LSD operation. But solving it created a liability even more dangerous. Sitting on 20 kilograms of ergot alkaloid was the chemical equivalent of hiding weapons-grade plutonium in your garage. The precursor alone, forget any finished product, constituted overwhelming evidence of intent to manufacture a Schedule I substance. Possession carried an automatic life sentence in federal court. Pickard now controlled the holy grail of psychedelic production, but he needed a fortress to use it. Somewhere invisible to surveillance. somewhere impenetrable to raids, somewhere no law enforcement agency would think to investigate. Gordon Todd Skinner appeared like an answer to a prayer Pickard never consciously made. Skinner was a trust fund eccentric from Tulsa, Oklahoma, part con artist, part self-taught chemist, part carnival barker with a gift for making the implausible sound inevitable. He'd floated through schemes his entire adult life, always staying one step ahead of consequences. In 1996, using family inheritance money, Skinner purchased a property that didn't appear on any DEA target list, a decommissioned Atlas E missile silo in Wamego, Kansas, a 15-story underground bunker constructed in 1961 to house intercontinental ballistic missiles, engineered to survive direct nuclear attack and continue operating through the apocalypse. 18-inch thick reinforced concrete walls, blast doors weighing dozens of tons, 15,000 square feet of tunnels and chambers, all invisible from the surface except for a few nondescript outbuildings. Skinner made Pickard an offer that seemed designed by fate. Cook your acid in my nuclear bunker. It's the only place on Earth secure enough to burn your fuel. The alliance formed within days, one man with precursor and expertise, another with the singular hiding place that matched the scale of ambition. But what happens when a meticulous genius partners with a chaotic narcissist? And can a fortress built to survive nuclear war protect you from the one threat you never see coming? From the surface, the Wamego silo looked like nothing worth investigating. A fenced patch of Kansas prairie, a few concrete outbuildings, grass growing through cracked pavement, rusted warning signs nobody bothered to read anymore. Below ground waited a Cold War labyrinth engineered to withstand a 1-megaton nuclear detonation and keep operating through radioactive fallout. Pickard descended the main access shaft for the first time in early 1999, a flashlight beam cutting through damp air thick with the smell of rust and stagnant water, and found himself standing in what could have been a supervillain's lair rendered in brutalist concrete. Miles of electrical conduit, tunnels branching into absolute darkness, ventilation ducts humming with stale oxygen recycled since the Kennedy administration. Remote, insulated, and perfect. Transforming this bunker into an industrial-scale LSD laboratory required logistics that would have challenged a legitimate pharmaceutical company with government contracts. Pickard and his longtime assistant Clyde Apperson hauled equipment down the shaft over multiple weeks. 50-liter reaction flasks, rotary evaporators standing taller than a man, vacuum pumps, heating mantles, condensers, chromatography columns, and enough specialty glassware to stock a university chemistry department twice over. They converted the Lester building, a cavernous chamber off the main access tunnel, into a clean room and primary production staging area. Motion sensors and intrusion alarms went up at every entrance point. Ventilation scrubbers filtered chemical fumes before they could drift toward the surface. Thick steel doors received industrial padlocks. They established coded communication protocols for the rare occasions anyone needed to emerge above ground. This wasn't a basement operation or a trailer park cook. It was a factory capable of industrial output. But the silo fought them at every step. Water seeped through concrete walls meant to stop gamma radiation, pooling in corners and raising ambient humidity to levels that threatened the delicate ergot compounds. LSD synthesis demands obsessive precision. Moisture or contamination can destroy entire batches worth millions. Pickard, accustomed to pristine university laboratories and the bone-dry desert air of his previous New Mexico operation, found himself battling an environment designed for missile maintenance, not molecular chemistry. He installed industrial dehumidifiers and calibrated them daily. He monitored temperature and dew point obsessively, recording measurements in laboratory notebooks. He worked in monk-like concentration while groundwater dripped somewhere in distant pipes like a metronome counting toward disaster. The bigger liability wasn't the environment. It was Skinner. The man who'd provided the fortress couldn't resist treating it like his personal psychedelic playground. Within months of production starting, he began hosting what he called silo parties, inviting friends, hangers-on, small-time dealers, and curious psychonauts into the underground complex to witness his kingdom. He served LSD dissolved on communion wafers during impromptu ceremonies he orchestrated himself, playing prophet in his concrete cathedral. He installed an 1,800-gallon hot tub in the silo's bathhouse, a spa unit so massive it required structural reinforcement, and ran up $3,000 monthly water bills while bathing daily in his subterranean palace. His girlfriend, a local goth dancer named Crystal Cole, moved into the bunker as his permanent companion. What was supposed to remain absolutely invisible was becoming an underground social club. Pickard demanded secrecy with increasing desperation. Skinner promised compliance with a grin. Then Skinner bought more furniture, invited more guests, and continued acting like a man who believed consequences were concepts that applied to other people. The tension between the disciplined chemist and his chaotic host grew sharper with every passing week. But production schedules couldn't wait for personality conflicts to resolve. What exactly happens when you synthesize LSD at industrial scale inside a nuclear bunker? And what kind of profit margins make partnering with an unstable narcissist seem like reasonable risk management? Mid-1999s. The silo completed its first full synthesis cycle. Ergocristine transformed through careful sequential reactions into lysergic acid, then into lysergic acid diethylamide, LSD in crystalline form, so pure it shimmered under laboratory lighting. The yield exceeded Pickard's projections. Nearly 1 kilogram of finished product from a single production run. 1 kilogram equals 10 million individual doses at standard microgram strength. Production cost per dose are less than 1 cent, and the street value per dose is up to $10. A single batch represented potential revenue exceeding $100 million at retail distribution. They had manufactured enough acid to supply the entire American market for months from one cook. Distribution required the same paranoid precision as production. Pickard designed what he internally called the marble cake system. Layered camouflage and organizational insulation protecting the lab from any downstream arrest or investigation. Fresh crystalline LSD dissolved into liquid form or absorbed into blotter paper that resembled ordinary art prints. Trusted intermediaries moved product to distant cities, Denver, San Francisco, Chicago, before any sales handoffs occurred. His primary West Coast distributor, known only as Petaluma Al, operated from California and never learned the laboratory's location despite handling millions of doses. Shipments traveled to European buyers through innocuous international packages. Each link in the distribution chain knew nothing about the links before or after it. If any courier fell to arrest, they couldn't betray the source because they'd never known where the source was. The system worked flawlessly. By late 1999, distinctive high-potency acid with recognizable artwork flooded rave scenes and college campuses across America and Europe. Users tripping in Amsterdam and Austin had no idea their supply traced back to a Kansas missile silo. DEA analysts noted the surge in super pure LSD saturating the market, but couldn't identify the manufacturing origin. Informants on the West Coast whispered about a genius chemist supplying everyone, but the whispers led nowhere actionable. Pickard and Apperson operated like executives of a Fortune 500 company that happened to sell enlightenment by the microgram. How long could an operation this massive remain invisible? And what would make the most careful chemist in America continue trusting the most reckless man he'd ever partnered with? Gordon Todd Skinner's sense of invincibility evaporated the moment handcuffs clicked around his wrists. The exact circumstances remain disputed in court documents. Some accounts describe an assault during a drug-fueled argument. Others mention a routine traffic stop that turned up contraband. The charge itself was relatively minor, the kind that might result in probation for a first-time offender. But Skinner wasn't a first-time offender, and he'd spent his adult life accumulating legal exposure that made any conviction potentially catastrophic. Real jail time loomed. The end of his underground kingdom seemed imminent. He possessed leverage no other defendant in Kansas had ever held, and he calculated how to deploy it within hours of booking. One night in the fall of 2000, while Pickard worked obliviously in the bunker below, Skinner placed a phone call to federal agents. His pitch landed like a grenade. "I can deliver you the general of the acid army." The DEA agent receiving the call was openly skeptical. A nationwide LSD kingpin operating from rural Kansas? The claim sounded like stoner mythology, or an informant desperate enough to fabricate anything. Skinner pressed harder with specific details. He described the silo's exact location, the laboratory's configuration, the stockpile of precursors, the scale of ongoing production. He wasn't bluffing or exaggerating. He was selling out his partner to save himself from consequences. The deal assembled quickly once agents verified his claims. Full immunity for Skinner on all charges in exchange for complete cooperation as a confidential informant. In late October 2000, DEA agents posing as Skinner's investor friends received a guided tour of the facility that exceeded their most optimistic expectations. They descended into the Lester building and found 45 green storage containers stacked along the walls in organized rows. They opened one container and found laboratory glassware packed in protective padding, chemical residue coating interior surfaces, the unmistakable signature of large-scale LSD synthesis. Lab analysis of collected samples confirmed what Skinner had promised. The DEA had located the largest acid operation in American history, and its owner had just handed them the keys. But locating the laboratory wasn't equivalent to building a prosecutable case. Catching Pickard required documented evidence of active manufacturing or transportation. Otherwise, a competent defense attorney might create reasonable doubt about his direct involvement. The agents couldn't storm an empty bunker and arrest people for owning chemistry equipment. They needed the chemist, the finished product, and the precursor together in circumstances that proved ongoing criminal conspiracy beyond question. At that moment, Operation White Rabbit commenced. Surveillance teams established positions around rural Wamego. Wiretaps activated on Skinner's telephone lines. The waiting game began. Skinner returned to the silo wearing federal recording equipment. On October 23, 2000, he met Pickard at a hotel in Marin County, California, a meeting DEA technicians videotaped from an adjacent room through the adjoining wall. On camera, Skinner discussed relocating the laboratory, floating the suggestion as if it originated from his own operational concerns. Pickard mentioned wanting his assistant Apperson to take custody of the equipment, perhaps already sensing something fundamentally wrong with his partner's demeanor. The DEA noted the tactical opening. If Pickard decided to move the operation, they could intercept him on public highways with product and equipment in plain view. Pickard's survival instincts were firing warnings he couldn't quite interpret. Phone recordings captured him questioning Skinner repeatedly about the ergocristine stockpile. Where exactly was it stored? Why had Skinner relocated it without consultation or permission? Skinner fabricated explanations, claiming he'd moved the canisters to his family's warehouse facility in Tulsa for improved security. Pickard's voice on the surveillance tapes grew increasingly sharp. Something felt wrong that he couldn't precisely identify. Skinner seemed nervous in ways that didn't match the situation, his laugh forced, his casual tone unconvincing. In one secretly recorded conversation, Pickard remarked that Skinner seemed different lately. The chemist was smelling betrayal without recognizing its source, but he couldn't abandon 20 kilograms of precursor over vague suspicions. The DEA tightened their operational grip. On October 31st, agents executed a search warrant on the silo property and found the laboratory packed in containers, not actively operating. They collected ergocristine samples as evidence, then quietly returned the canisters to their original location as bait for the final trap. Pickard didn't realize his precious fuel had been touched by federal hands and documented in evidence photographs. He only knew he needed to retrieve it and disappear permanently. The silo had become operationally untenable, too damp for precision chemistry, too exposed with Skinner behaving erratically. By early November, Pickard made his decision: shut down the Wamego facility permanently and relocate everything to a secure new location. The evacuation required days of careful work. 45 storage containers hauled from underground chambers through the access shaft and loaded into a rented Ryder moving truck. Apperson disassembled delicate condensers, wrapped irreplaceable glassware in protective padding, secured chemical barrels upright to prevent spillage during transport. By the evening of November 5th, the entire laboratory infrastructure, thousands of pounds of glass, specialized equipment, reagents, and production materials occupied the truck's cargo hold. Only the ergocristine stockpile remained uncollected. Pickard refused to abandon it under any circumstances. That precursor represented every future production batch, every dose that would flow to millions of users across years of operation. Skinner, following his DEA handler's instructions precisely, informed Pickard the canisters would be waiting at the silo's surface shed on November 6th. The trap was armed and ready. What Pickard didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that federal agents had positioned those canisters exactly where he'd find them, and that Kansas Highway Patrol cruisers were already stationed along every possible exit route, waiting for the signal to converge. November 6, 2000. Pickard located 14 aluminum canisters beside the silo's surface, shed exactly where Skinner promised they'd be, and loaded them into the trunk of a rented Buick LeSabre. One additional container held a kilogram of LSD in solution, the crystalline output of their final synthesis run, dissolved into stable liquid form, worth millions at wholesale prices. Apperson climbed into the Ryder truck's cab, walkie-talkie in hand for convoy communication. They pulled onto the gravel access road and headed toward Highway 24, headlights dark to avoid attracting attention. Freedom appeared to wait just a few miles west toward Topeka. The lights hit them without warning. Red and blue strobes erupted simultaneously from multiple directions in the darkness. Kansas Highway Patrol cruisers that had been trailing at invisible distance closed the gap in seconds. A trooper vehicle roared alongside the Ryder truck and cut directly in front, forcing Apperson to brake hard or collide. Another cruiser boxed the Buick against the roadside. Apperson surrendered without resistance. Officers yanked him from the truck cab at gunpoint, pushed him against the vehicle, and secured handcuffs before he fully processed what was happening. Pickard ran. He threw the Buick into park without cutting the engine, flung open the driver's door, and sprinted into rain-soaked darkness while the car drifted forward into a roadside ditch. Pickard was 55 years old, but moved like a man decades younger. He'd trained as a marathon runner for exactly this kind of desperate moment. Adrenaline carried him into tall grass and waterlogged mud, while flashlight beams swept uselessly through the distance behind him. Radios crackled across multiple frequencies. Suspect fled on foot, heading west into agricultural fields. Thermal imaging wasn't available. The manhunt spread across the rural expanse under drizzling rain, but Pickard had vanished into the Kansas night. Back at the vehicles, agents surveyed what they'd captured. The Ryder truck's cargo door swung open to reveal a mobile laboratory that exceeded anything documented in DEA institutional history. Racks of sophisticated glassware, reaction coils, Erlenmeyer flasks, fractional distillation columns, boxes of chemicals labeled with handwritten codes, drums of waste solvent bearing hazardous material warnings, a 3-ring binder containing handwritten LSD synthesis procedures and production logs documenting previous batches, furniture, ventilation equipment, precision measuring instruments, everything necessary to manufacture acid at industrial volume packed into a single rental vehicle. Preliminary inventory staggered the agents examining the haul. 41.3 kilograms of LSD in various prepared forms, 23.6 kilograms of iso-LSD synthesis byproduct, 97.5 kilograms of lysergic acid intermediate compound, 19 kilograms of unused ergot alkaloid precursor, sufficient raw material for hundreds of millions of doses. One veteran agent surveyed the cargo and verbalized what everyone present was calculating. This is the whole damn supply. Within an hour, confirmation rocketed up the federal chain of command. The silo lab is down. Hazmat response teams were dispatched immediately. Skin contact with concentrated LSD powder could dose agents accidentally through dermal absorption, making standard evidence handling dangerous. DEA headquarters issued a statement calling it the largest LSD laboratory seizure in agency history. The description wasn't hyperbole or public relations spin. William Leonard Pickard remained at large for precisely 24 hours. A farmer in a neighboring county spotted a mud-covered man lurking near his barn and recognized the fugitive from news broadcasts circulating the description. Deputies arrived within minutes and flushed Pickard into one final desperate sprint across an open field. Exhausted from exposure, hypothermic after a night hiding in a borrowed truck during freezing rain, he was tackled within 200 yards and handcuffed face down in Kansas mud. The Acid King's reign ended in a farmer's pasture. The federal prosecution assembled itself with crushing efficiency. Photographs of the silo laboratory interior, tables covered in reaction flasks and chemical apparatus, the staggering inventory of seized materials. Soil samples collected from outside the bunker that tested positive for LSD contamination. Pickard had dumped synthesis waste directly into Kansas earth, leaving chemical evidence in the ground itself. And Gordon Todd Skinner's testimony, delivered with full immunity protection, describing every operational detail in terms a jury could understand. Deliberations lasted hours, not days. In March 2003, William Leonard Pickard and Clyde Apperson were convicted on all federal counts of conspiracy to manufacture and distribute LSD. The sentences matched the unprecedented scale. Pickard, age 58 at sentencing, received 2 consecutive life terms without possibility of parole. Apperson received 30 years in federal custody, effectively a life sentence for a man approaching 60. At the press conference announcing the verdicts, DEA officials displayed a statistic that validated the magnitude of their victory. LSD availability across the United States collapsed by 95% in the 2 years following these arrests. The agency hadn't dismantled a distribution network or arrested street dealers. They had captured the manufacturing monopoly itself. One chemist had been supplying nearly the entire nation's demand. Gordon Todd Skinner walked free from the LSD prosecution. Immunity protected him from everything he'd revealed and confessed. His freedom lasted until darker impulses overwhelmed him completely. Years later, he was convicted of kidnapping and torturing a former associate in a case involving syringes filled with unknown chemical compounds and days of captivity. He's currently serving a life sentence in Texas State Prison, his reward for betrayal consumed by his own capacity for cruelty. Pickard maintained silence for 2 decades behind federal walls. In 2020, after serving 20 years, he received compassionate release during the COVID-19 pandemic. He emerged at 75 years old, physically diminished but philosophically unbroken, still insisting what he'd manufactured was medicine rather than contraband. The DEA's 95% availability collapse has been questioned by some researchers who argue market decline was already underway, but the fundamental reality remains undisputed. When the Wamego silo fell, an era ended. The psychedelic drought that followed lasted years. If you want to understand what happens when a different genius builds a different kind of empire using complete anonymity instead of physical fortresses, watch our video on Ross Ulbricht and the Silk Road. That story begins with an even bolder premise. What if you could sell anything to anyone, anywhere, without ever revealing your face or your location?